Millionaire abandoned ex-wife for his mistress on their wedding day. What happened next shocked everyone. Amara Lewis stood at the altar in her wedding gown, beaded silk clinging to every dream she'd stitched into this moment. The murmur of 300 guests and the priest's rehearsed smile dissolved the instant Chase Whitman raised his hand, not to take hers, but to point. His finger aimed across the altar like an accusation. "I can't marry you," he said, his voice cutting through organ music and gasps. "I'm with Sabrina now." The priest's Bible slipped an inch. Someone in the third pew let out a strangled sob. But Amara didn't move. She stood frozen beneath the crystal chandeliers, her bouquet of white peonies trembling in her grip. Across from her, Sabrina Cortez, 30 years old, draped in a crimson dress that defied every wedding protocol, stepped forward. She didn't apologize. She didn't look away. She smiled. Chase adjusted his Patek Philippe watch, the kind that cost more than most people's cars. He wasn't nervous. He was impatient. "I have a car waiting," he added, glancing toward the cathedral doors. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." If you're ready to enjoy this story, click that subscribe button, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. Outside, spring rain began to tap against the stained glass windows. Through the colored light, Amara could see the blurred shapes of photographers already gathering on the church steps. The whispers had started weeks ago. Sabrina Cortez, venture capitalist, Chase's business associate. But Amara had believed him when he said it was nothing. She looked at her reflection in the gold-framed mirror beside the altar. Pale face. Red-rimmed eyes. A bride abandoned in front of everyone who mattered. Her mother's voice floated from the front row. "Amara, sweetheart." But Amara didn't turn. She set the bouquet down on the altar steps, lifted the hem of her gown, and walked. Not down the aisle. Down the side exit. Away from the gasps, the cameras, the man who had just dismantled her life with a single pointed finger. The oak door closed behind her with a hollow thud. Inside, the priest cleared his throat. A violinist in the balcony lowered her bow. And Chase Whitman, heir to a $50 million fortune, walked down that same aisle with Sabrina Cortez on his arm, her red dress trailing like a victory flag. The reception hall stood empty. Tables set for 300. Champagne sweating in silver buckets. A wedding cake with sugar flowers that would never be cut. Amara stood alone in the venue's marble foyer, her veil pooling around her feet like a discarded ghost. Her maid of honor, Claire, appeared beside her, mascara-streaked and furious. "Do you want me to call your lawyer?" Claire whispered. Amara shook her head. "No. I just want to leave." She gathered the train of her dress, slipped her phone into the hidden pocket of her gown, and stepped into the rain. It soaked through the silk instantly, cold and unforgiving. She walked past the line of Blacktown cars still waiting for a bride and groom who would never need them. Past the luxury hotel across the street where the honeymoon suite, already paid for, sat empty. Past the flower vendor who had prepared her bouquet that morning. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, flat and hollow. No baby. No future. Just her. "We'll survive this," she whispered to herself, the rain mixing with tears she refused to acknowledge. Then, from behind a parked SUV, a camera flash exploded. "Miss Lewis!" A photographer shouted. "Is it true Chase Whitman left you at the altar for Sabrina Cortez?" Amara froze. For the first time, she understood. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was a spectacle. And the entire world was already watching. For weeks later, the engagement photos flooded every society page. Chase Whitman and Sabrina Cortez, photographed on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Her hand resting on his chest, a diamond the size of a marble glinting in the sunlight. The headlines purred with admiration. Power couple goals. Whitman heir finds his match. Love wins. Amara sat in a cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn, wearing an old Columbia hoodie and sweatpants that hadn't been washed in 3 days. The glow of her laptop screen cast shadows under her eyes. Every click brought another image. Sabrina in couture, Chase in linen, both of them radiant, untouchable, victorious. She closed the screen. But the images stayed burned into her mind. Chase's hand on Sabrina's waist, the same way he used to hold her when they danced in their kitchen at midnight. A knock rattled the door. It was Maya Chen, her friend from architecture school, now a lawyer who specialized in corporate litigation and refused to let Amara disappear into silence. Maya walked in carrying 2 iced coffees and a paper bag from the corner deli. "I brought sustenance," she said, eyeing the mess of crumpled tissues and unopened mail. "And reality. Have you seen the news?" Amara nodded, her voice barely audible. "He's engaged. For weeks after humiliating me in front of 300 people." Maya set the coffee down with a sharp click. Classic Chase. He thinks optics equal power. But the Whitman board isn't impressed. "I've heard whispers. Investors are nervous. Public drama isn't good for legacy fortunes." "He'll spin it," Amara said flatly. "He always does." "Then we build something he can't spin," Maya countered. "You're an architect, Amara. You know how to build from nothing." Amara looked down at her hands, empty and trembling. She wanted to believe Maya, but everything inside her felt demolished. That night she couldn't sleep. Rain drummed against the window, relentless and cold. She picked up her phone again, scrolling through the engagement photos one more time. One shot in particular gutted her. Chase and Sabrina standing in front of the Whitman estate, the same estate where he had proposed to her 2 years ago under the oak tree by the pond. The comments below were merciless. "Upgrade complete." The ex must be fuming. Finally, a woman who matches his ambition. She locked the phone and sat in the dark. Her mind replayed everything. How Chase used to send her handwritten notes from business trips, how they'd stayed up all night designing the floor plan for their dream house, how she'd worked 2 jobs to help him through his father's health crisis while he built his reputation. She had believed in him, defended him, built his world with her own hands. And now that world had no place for her. In the months after that humiliating ceremony, Amara learned that silence could be louder than screaming. 2 weeks after the altar incident, that's what the media called it, as if incident could contain the detonation of her entire life. Her face appeared on every tabloid in the city. "The bride he left behind." The headline sat above a photo someone had captured. Amara mid-step, leaving the cathedral in the rain, her veil dragging through a puddle, her face a portrait of shock. She hadn't given interviews, hadn't released statements, hadn't even opened her apartment blinds. But the story wrote itself anyway. Inside her cramped studio in Brooklyn, the tap of laptop keys became her only companion. She sat cross-legged on her bed, still wearing the same Yale architecture department sweatshirt she'd worn for 3 days straight, composing her resignation letter to Hartfield and Associates. "Dear Mr. Hartfield, effective immediately, I resign from my position as junior design associate." The cursor blinked. Her fingers hovered. She could hear her mother's voice in her head. "Don't make emotional decisions. Wait. Think." But there was nothing left to think about. The other associates had started treating her like glass. Delicate, breakable, pitiable. The receptionist had stopped making eye contact. Even her desk had become a shrine to what she'd lost. An engagement photo someone forgot to remove from the company newsletter pinned to the corkboard behind her monitor. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The confirmation email arrived 30 seconds later. "Your resignation has been received and accepted." Just like that. 3 years of 80-hour weeks, renderings, and portfolio building erased with a single keystroke. Amara closed the laptop. The apartment fell silent again. The kind of silence that made her ears ring. She glanced at her phone, still face down on the nightstand where it had been for days. 47 missed calls. 112 text messages. Most from people who wanted the story. A few from people who genuinely cared. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. Across the Atlantic in Monte Carlo, a different story was unfolding. Chase Whitman stood on the deck of a rented yacht, his arm wrapped around Sabrina Cortez's waist. The Mediterranean sun glinted off his aviator sunglasses. Sabrina leaned into him, her white linen dress billowing in the breeze, her smile sharp and satisfied. A photographer from Lux magazine crouched nearby, capturing every angle. "Perfect," the photographer called out. "Now, Sabrina, rest your hand on his chest." "Yes, just like that." "Chase, look at her like she's the only woman in the world." He did. Because in that moment, in that frame, she was. The spread would run the following week. New beginnings. Chase Whitman and Sabrina Cortez on love, ambition, and moving forward. Sabrina's quote would be printed in elegant serif font beneath a photo of them toasting champagne. Sometimes the universe clears the path for what's meant to be. I'm just grateful we found each other. No mention of the cathedral. No mention of Amara. Just glossy erasure, printed on heavy stock paper and distributed to every luxury waiting room from Manhattan to Milan. Back in Brooklyn, Amara made a decision. She opened her laptop again, this time navigating to a different screen. Airline tickets. One way. Departure. JFK. Destination. Charles de Gaulle, Paris. She didn't think. Didn't budget. Didn't plan. She just clicked purchase. The confirmation email felt like permission to breathe. Over the next 72 hours, Amara dismantled her life with surgical precision. She sold her furniture on Craigslist, the mid-century sofa Chase had picked out, the dining table they'd found at a flea market in Connecticut, the bed frame they'd assembled together while drinking wine and laughing at the incomprehensible instructions. Everything went for half its worth. She didn't negotiate. Didn't care. Her closet came next. The cocktail dresses she'd worn to Whitman Industries galas, the heels that pinched but looked expensive, the cashmere coat Chase had given her last Christmas. All of it stuffed into donation bags and left on the curb. She kept only what fit into 2 suitcases. Jeans, sweaters, her sketchbooks, her laptop, and 1 framed photo of her late father. Everything else was noise. Maya came by on the last night, carrying Thai takeout and a bottle of wine they both knew Amara wouldn't drink. "You don't have to run," Maya said gently, setting the containers on the empty kitchen counter. "I'm not running," Amara replied, zipping her suitcase. "I'm choosing." "Choosing what?" "To disappear before they turn me into a punchline." Maya was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. But disappear strategically. Paris has good architecture programs. Connections. Don't just hide, rebuild." Amara met her friend's eyes, seeing something there she hadn't seen in weeks. Belief. "I'll try," she whispered. The flight to Paris left at dawn. Amara sat in the middle seat of economy, her forehead pressed against the seat in front of her, earbuds in but no music playing. Just silence. Around her, passengers read, slept, watched movies. Normal people living normal lives. She wondered when she'd feel normal again. 7 hours later, she landed in a city she'd only visited once, during a college semester abroad that felt like someone else's memory. The apartment she'd found online, sublet from a graduate student studying in Berlin, was in the 11th arrondissement, tucked between a bakery and a used bookstore. The building's exterior was charming. Cream-colored stone, wrought iron balconies, window boxes that had once held geraniums. The interior was less romantic. The studio was 30 square meters of peeling wallpaper, water-stained ceilings, and radiators that clanked like prisoners rattling chains. The windows were heavy, the kind that required both hands to open, and they overlooked a narrow courtyard where pigeons congregated and argued. But it was hers, and no one here knew her name. Amara set her suitcases down in the center of the room, the sound echoing off the bare walls. She walked to the window, forced it open, and let the Parisian air rush in cool, laced with bread and exhaust and possibility. Below, the city hummed. Unfamiliar voices. Foreign rhythms. A place where she could be no one. She pulled out her sketchbook, sat on the floor with her back against the wall, and opened to a blank page. For the first time in 2 weeks, her hand moved without trembling. She drew a single line. Then another. Not a building. Not a plan. Just movement. Proof that something inside her still worked. In the City of Light, Amara Lewis planned to bury her shame and build something stronger than revenge. She planned to build herself. Paris taught Amara that healing wasn't linear. It was architectural. Some days she built. Other days she demolished. And on the worst days, she simply existed in the rubble, waiting for the courage to start again. She found work 3 weeks after arriving, at a restoration studio tucked behind the Musée Picasso. Atelier Rousseau specialized in historical preservation. Crumbling chateaux, forgotten estates, buildings that had survived wars and revolutions but couldn't survive neglect. The owner, Monsieur Rousseau, was 73 and half blind. He hired Amara on the spot after she sketched a structural solution to a 17th century ceiling collapse on the back of a coffee-stained napkin. "You see bones," he said in accented English, studying her drawing. "Not just beauty. Bones." She worked nights. Midnight to dawn. While the city slept, she measured archways, calculated load-bearing capacities, drafted plans under the harsh glow of construction lights. Her hands grew calloused. Her back ached. But her mind finally went quiet. The work was meticulous, unforgiving, honest. Unlike people, buildings didn't lie. They showed their damage, their cracks, their breaking points. And if you paid attention, they told you exactly how to fix them. Mornings, she returned to her apartment as the sun rose over the rooftops, casting long shadows through her heavy windows. She'd make coffee in the dented mocha pot she'd bought from a flea market, then sit on the windowsill, legs tucked beneath her, sketchbook balanced on her knees. This was her time. Her cathedral. She drew spaces that didn't exist yet. Clean lines. Soulful rooms. Architecture that breathed. Buildings designed not for ego or intimidation, but for living. Really living. Every sketch was an exorcism, a way of bleeding out the past one pencil stroke at a time. The windowsill became sacred. The sun warmed her scars, the invisible ones that wrapped around her ribs and squeezed when she thought about white peonies and pointed fingers. By the end of her first year in Paris, something unexpected happened. People started talking. Not about the bride who'd been abandoned. Not about the scandal. About the architect. The one who'd restored the ceiling frescoes at the Chateau de Montrose. The one whose sketches for a boutique hotel in the Marais had gone viral on design blogs. The one whispered about in the studios along Rue de Rivoli. Clean lines. Soulful spaces. That's Amara Lewis. She didn't seek attention. Didn't network at gallery openings or pitch herself to firms. But her work spoke, quietly, insistently, and the right people listened. Then came the call. It was a Tuesday morning, 18 months after she'd landed in Paris. Amara was perched on her windowsill, sketching a concept for adaptive reuse, turning an old railway station into community housing, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. International code. She almost didn't answer. Ms. Lewis. The voice was crisp, professional, vaguely British. My name is Caroline Reeves. I represent a private investor interested in funding a boutique design firm. Your name came highly recommended. Amara's pencil stilled. I'm not looking for employment. We're not offering employment. We're offering partnership. Capital, creative freedom, and international reach. My client believes in investing in visionaries, not resumes. Who's your client? He prefers to introduce himself personally. Are you available Thursday? 2 o'clock? Café de Flore. Amara hesitated. She'd been burned by charm before. By men with expensive watches and promises wrapped in tailored suits. But something in Caroline's tone, efficient, unbothered, genuine, made her curious. I'll be there, she said. Thursday arrived wrapped in rain. Café de Flore was exactly what tourists imagine Paris to be. Red awnings, marble-top tables, waiters in bow ties who moved with choreographed precision. Amara arrived 10 minutes early, wearing dark jeans, a charcoal blazer, and the quiet confidence of someone who'd stopped apologizing for existing. She ordered an espresso and waited. At precisely 2 o'clock, a man walked in. Tall, early 40s. Dark hair threaded with gray at the temples. He wore a simple navy sweater and jeans. No Rolex, no designer labels, no performance. He scanned the room with the careful attention of someone used to evaluating spaces. Then his eyes landed on her. He approached without hesitation. Amara Lewis. She nodded. Adrian Blake. He extended his hand. His grip was firm but not dominating. Thank you for meeting me. Adrian Blake. The name landed like a stone dropping into still water. She knew it. Everyone in the design world knew it. Tech entrepreneur turned philanthropist. 42 years old. Widower, his wife, an architect herself, had died in a car accident 3 years ago. Since then, he'd pivoted his entire empire toward sustainable development and innovative housing solutions. He sat across from her, ordered a coffee, and got straight to the point. I've been following your work, he said. The Montrose restoration. The Marais concept. You see space differently. Not as luxury but as life. You're flattering me into something, Amara replied carefully. What do you want? A slight smile. Directness. Good. I want to fund your firm. Full capital investment. You maintain creative control. I provide resources, connections, and infrastructure. We build projects that matter. Housing, community spaces, adaptive reuse. No vanity towers. No ego monuments. Why me? Because you're not trying to prove anything to anyone, Adrian said simply. You're building because you have to. That's rare. Amara studied him. His eyes didn't slide over her, didn't assess her like an acquisition. He looked at her the way Monsieur Rousseau had looked at her napkin sketch, seeing the bones, not the surface. Not like Chase had. Not like she was a prize to be won or discarded. But like she was an equal. What's the catch? She asked. No catch. Just expectation. I don't invest in mediocrity. If we do this, we do it right. Amara leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of the offer settle. Outside, rain blurred the street. Inside, something unfamiliar stirred in her chest. Not hope. Not yet. But possibility. I'll need to see a contract, she said. And full transparency on funding sources. You'll have it by Monday. Adrian stood, leaving cash on the table for both coffees. Before he left, he paused. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I know what it's like to rebuild from nothing. You're doing it right. He walked out into the rain, leaving Amara alone with her espresso and the strange, fragile sensation of being seen. For the first time in 2 years, she smiled. Not the performance smile she'd worn at the altar. Not the mask she'd shown the photographers. A real smile. Small. Tentative. Hers. Outside, Paris continued. Taxis honked. Lovers argued. The rain fell steady and true. And somewhere inside the ruins of who she'd been, Amara Lewis began to believe she might actually survive this. Back in New York, Sabrina Cortez learned that winning could feel exactly like losing. She glowed on magazine covers. Vogue called her the woman redefining power couple aesthetics. Harper's Bazaar photographed her in Chase's penthouse, draped across Italian leather furniture, captioned, "Ambition looks good on her." The comments sections worshipped her, the woman who'd claimed what she wanted without apology. But photographs didn't show what happened after the cameras left. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue, Chase's pride, his inheritance, his monument to the Whitman legacy, felt like a museum after hours. Beautiful. Cold. Untouchable. Sabrina wandered its marble hallways in silk robes and designer heels, a queen in a castle that wasn't quite hers. Chase had grown moody. He spent mornings locked in his study, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and tense. Afternoons, he'd emerge with his jaw clenched, pour 3 fingers of scotch, and stare out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. He stopped asking about her day. Stopped laughing at her observations about their social circle. Stopped touching her the way he had when she was still a secret. At night, he turned away from her in bed, his back a wall. "Long day?" she'd ask. "The board's restless," he'd mutter. "Go to sleep." The Whitman Industries board was more than restless. They were circling. Sabrina heard the whispers at charity galas, caught the exchanged glances at investor dinners. Chase's last 2 acquisitions, a luxury hotel chain in Miami and a commercial real estate play in Austin, had hemorrhaged money. Overpriced. Overextended. Overleveraged on his father's reputation and his own arrogance. The quarterly reports read like autopsies. Board members who'd once clasped Chase's shoulder and called him the future now avoided eye contact. His father's oldest allies, the men who'd built Whitman Industries from timber and steel, were making calls to private equity firms, exploring options, testing the waters for a graceful exit. Chase pretended not to notice. But Sabrina saw him checking his phone obsessively, reading financial blogs at 2 a.m, his face illuminated by the blue glow of bad news. "It's temporary," he told her when she asked. "Just a rough quarter." But it had been 3 rough quarters. And counting. Sabrina had her own frustrations. She'd entered this relationship, stolen it actually, in full view of 300 witnesses, with clear expectations. She wasn't playing Mistress. She wasn't arm candy. She was Sabrina Cortez, venture capitalist, strategist, a woman who'd built her own portfolio before she was 30. She'd assumed that being with Chase meant access, influence, a seat at the table where decisions were made. Instead, she got red carpet appearances and table assignments at fundraisers. When she'd asked to attend a Whitman Industries board meeting, just to observe, to understand the business, Chase had laughed. "It's finance and real estate, babe. You'd be bored, babe." She'd swallowed her anger, smiled, and let it go. But when she suggested joining the Whitman Foundation board, a philanthropic arm she could actually contribute to, he'd waved her off. "The optics are complicated right now. Let's table it." Everything was tabled. Everything was not the right time. Everything was her waiting in the penthouse while Chase managed an empire that was quietly collapsing. The fight came on a Tuesday night in October. They'd just returned from a gala at the Metropolitan Museum, where Sabrina had stood beside Chase for 2 hours, smiling for photographers, making small talk with socialites who looked at her like she was a fascinating scandal. Chase had barely spoken to her all evening, too busy networking with investors who gave him tight, polite smiles. Back in the penthouse, Sabrina kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of wine. "You were distracted tonight," she said. Chase loosened his tie, not looking at her. "I was working. You were performing. There's a difference." He turned, irritation flashing in his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" Sabrina set down her wine glass carefully, like she was defusing a bomb. "It means I stood there for 2 hours playing the role you assigned me. Charming, decorative, silent, and I'm tired of it. No one's forcing you to attend these events. You are. Because if I don't show up, people ask questions. And God forbid the great Chase Whitman appears anywhere without his conquest." His jaw tightened. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Tell the truth." She stepped closer, her voice sharpening. "When will I be more than your +1, Chase? When do I get a title? A role? Anything beyond being the woman you paraded around to prove you could discard your fiancé?" The words hung in the air like broken glass. Chase's face shifted. Shock, then anger, then something colder. "You knew what this was. I knew what you said it was. Partnership. Equals. A real relationship. And it is." "No." Sabrina's voice cracked, surprising them both. "It's a performance. You wanted me because I looked good in photographs. Because I made Amara's humiliation more complete. Because I was the woman willing to wear red to someone else's wedding." Chase stepped back, his expression hardening into something she'd never seen before. Not the charming heir. Not the confident businessman. Something smaller. Cornered. "If you're so unhappy," he said quietly, "the door's right there." The silence that followed was brutal. Sabrina stared at him, this man she'd appended her life for, this relationship she'd defended in comment sections and confrontations, and felt the truth settle in her chest like a stone. He hadn't chosen her. He'd chosen a storyline. A way to assert control. A dramatic exit from a commitment that bored him. She was never the prize. She was the weapon. And now that the novelty had faded, now that the photographers stopped calling, now that his empire was crumbling, what was she? Sabrina picked up her wine glass and walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the Manhattan skyline. "I won you," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "That's what everyone said. I won." Behind her, Chase poured another scotch. "Then why," Sabrina whispered, "does it feel like I'm the one who lost?" He didn't answer. Outside, the city glittered, a million lights hiding a million private collapses. Sabrina pressed her palm against the cold glass and wondered, for the first time since she'd stepped into that cathedral wearing red, if the man she'd stolen had ever been worth the heist. In the reflection, she watched Chase drain his glass and retreat to his study, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. The penthouse fell silent. And Sabrina Cortez, the woman who'd taken what she wanted without apology, stood alone in a castle made of glass and aging favors, realizing she'd traded everything for nothing at all. Amara returned to New York on a February morning when the city was wrapped in snow and new beginnings. No press releases. No social media announcements. No dramatic entrance designed to signal her return. She simply landed at JFK with 2 passports, 2 car seats, and a life so different from the one she'd left that it felt like someone else's borrowed autobiography. The twins, Kai and Lila, were 15 months old, born 3 weeks early in a private hospital in Paris, with Adrian holding her hand through every contraction, every push, every terrifying, beautiful moment. They had his dark curls and her amber eyes, and they were everything Chase Whitman wasn't. Pure, joyful, permanent. Kai laughed at shadows. Lila studied faces like she was memorizing blueprints. Together, they'd turned Amara's carefully controlled life into chaos. The good kind, the kind that meant 3 a.m. feedings and grape juice stains on architectural drawings, and realizing that love didn't always announce itself with pointed fingers and cathedral ceremonies. Sometimes it just arrived. Quietly. In the form of a man who saw you drowning and offered partnership instead of rescue. Adrian had proposed on a Tuesday. No ring. No theatrics. Just the two of them sitting on the floor of her Paris apartment, surrounded by fabric samples for a community housing project. Amara 6 months pregnant and exhausted, wearing one of his sweaters because all of hers had stopped fitting. "Marry me," he'd said, looking up from a material specification sheet. She'd laughed. "That's not a proposal. It's a statement of intent." He'd set the papers aside, his expression serious. "I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want our children to have both our names. But if you're not ready, if marriage still feels like a cathedral and pointed fingers, we'll build it anyway. I'm not going anywhere." She'd cried. Then she'd said yes. They married at a small mairie in the 6th arrondissement 3 weeks before the twins were born. Just them, Maya flying in from New York, and a city clerk who looked bored until Adrian kissed Amara and she saw even the clerk smile. No cathedral. No guests. No expectations. Just a choice they both made freely. Now, 20 months later, they were back. The brownstone in Brooklyn Heights was Adrian's. A 4-story limestone he'd bought years ago and never quite finished renovating. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, original crown molding, a garden out back where Kai and Lila could learn to walk on grass instead of Parisian cobblestones. Amara stood in the living room while the movers brought in boxes, the twins napping upstairs in their new nursery, and felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. Not closure. Not victory. Just the quiet knowledge that she'd survived and rebuilt and become someone she actually liked. Her firm, Lewis Blake Design, had grown from a Paris studio into a transatlantic operation. They specialized in adaptive reuse, turning forgotten buildings into functional art. Historic structures with stories trapped in their bones, waiting for someone to listen. The work was exactly what she'd sketched on her windowsill 3 years ago. Clean lines. Soulful spaces. Architecture that breathed. And now, they'd won their first major New York commission. The announcement had come via email 2 weeks before they moved. Adrian had been feeding Lila mashed bananas when Amara read it aloud from her laptop. "We got the Whitman project." Adrian's hand had stilled, spoon hovering mid-air. "The Gramercy building?" "Yes. The Whitman Gramercy Tower. A 1920s Art Deco landmark on the edge of Gramercy Park. 12 stories of ornamental limestone, cast iron details, and water-damaged interiors. It had sat empty for 3 years while Whitman Industries debated whether to restore or demolish. Lewis Blake Design had submitted a proposal 6 months ago. Restore the facade, gut the interior, create mixed-income housing with ground-floor community space. Preserve the history. Serve the future. The bid had been a long shot. But apparently, someone at Whitman Industries had actually read the proposal instead of just checking the numbers. What they didn't know, what the approval emails and architectural review boards didn't know, was that Amara Lewis was the same woman Chase Whitman had abandoned at the altar 4 years ago. Different name now. Different life. Different woman entirely. But same bones. Adrian had set down the spoon carefully. Does he know? Not yet. Amara had closed the laptop. The firm name is Lewis Blake. The partner listings show A. Lewis and A. Blake. Unless he's paying attention, which, based on the financial reports Maya's been sending me, he's not, he won't connect it until we're in the same room. And when that happens, Amara had looked at her husband, this man who'd seen her at her lowest and never once asked her to perform, and smiled. Then he'll realize the bride he discarded is now the architect rewriting his legacy. Adrian had grinned. I love you. I know. Now, standing in their Brooklyn brownstone with the February sun streaming through century-old windows, Amara pulled out her phone and checked her calendar. Monday. Site visit at the Whitman Gramercy Tower. 10 a.m. meeting with the development team and key stakeholders. She'd be walking into a Whitman Industries boardroom for the first time since the wedding that never was. But this time she wouldn't be the bride. She'd be the architect. The partner. The woman whose firm held the contract. Upstairs, one of the twins started crying. Kai, based on the indignant pitch. Amara set her phone down and climbed the stairs, finding him standing in his crib, arms outstretched, his little face crumpled with the injustice of waking up in an unfamiliar room. Hey, baby, she murmured, lifting him out. I know. New place. But look. She carried him to the window, pointing at the snow-dusted garden below. That's yours. Yours and Lila's. Space to run and fall and get back up. Kai pressed his palm against the glass, leaving a tiny handprint. Lila stirred in the adjacent crib, blinking awake with her father's serious expression. Both of you up? Amara laughed, settling Kai on her hip and reaching for Lila. Of course you are. She held them both, one on each hip, her back already protesting, and looked out at the Brooklyn skyline beyond the garden. Manhattan rose in the distance, sharp and glittering and indifferent. Somewhere in that skyline was the Gramercy building, and somewhere in that building's ownership structure was Chase Whitman, whose empire was quietly crumbling while he focused on optics and aging favors. He didn't know she was coming. Didn't know she'd spent 4 years becoming someone he could never touch. Didn't know that the forgotten bride had become the architect who would reshape his legacy. One blueprint, one restored building, one choice at a time. Monday would come. And when it did, Amara would walk into that boardroom not with vengeance or vindication, but with something far more powerful. Competence. Confidence. Children who depended on her. A life that had nothing to do with him at all. Welcome home, she whispered to the twins, kissing their foreheads. Outside, New York waited, rewritten, reimagined, and finally hers. It was the night everyone would remember. The Plaza Hotel ballroom glittered like a jewelry box turned inside out. Crystal chandeliers catching light from 1,000 angles, champagne flutes creating a symphony of delicate clinks, and Manhattan's elite draped in couture and carefully maintained relevance. The annual Urban Development Gala. Black tie. Invitation only. The kind of event where fortunes shifted hands between the salmon course and dessert, where philanthropy was performance art, and where being seen mattered more than the actual cause. Amara arrived at 7:47 p.m. Not fashionably late. Not desperately early. Precisely when she intended. She stepped through the entrance in a midnight blue gown, silk that moved like water, a neckline that suggested elegance without apology, her hair swept into a low chignon that revealed the strong line of her jaw. Diamond studs, Adrian's gift, simple and perfect, caught the light. On her left, Adrian Blake in a classic tuxedo, his hand resting gently at the small of her back. On her right, matching velvet-clad chaos. Kai and Lila. The twins wore navy velvet. Kai in a tiny suit with a bow tie he kept trying to remove, Lila in a dress with tulle that she kept swishing experimentally. They'd insisted on coming, and Amara had agreed. Not as props. Not as statements. But because they were part of her life, and she was done hiding any piece of herself. The ballroom turned. Not all at once, but in waves. Heads swiveling, conversations pausing mid-sentence, recognition rippling through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Is that? It can't be. The bride from. Amara felt their stares. She didn't flinch. A waiter appeared with champagne. Adrian took 2 glasses, handed her one, and bent to whisper in her ear, "You're magnificent." She smiled. "I'm terrified. That's how you know you're alive." Across the ballroom, near the bar where the real power players congregated, Chase Whitman stood with a tumbler of scotch and a carefully constructed expression of confidence. He wore Tom Ford. His hair was professionally styled. His Patek Philippe caught the light with every gesture. To anyone watching, he looked like exactly what he was. Old money, new troubles, maintaining appearances. Sabrina Cortez stood beside him in scarlet. Of course, scarlet, always scarlet. Her hand looped through his arm with the possessive grip of someone who knew she was losing territory. She'd been holding court, charming a hedge fund manager's wife, when she felt Chase's entire body go rigid. "What's wrong?" she murmured. He didn't answer. He was staring across the ballroom like he'd seen a ghost. Sabrina followed his gaze. And froze. Amara Lewis. No, not Lewis. Blake now, according to the whispers already circulating. Amara Blake. The architect. The one everyone was talking about. The Gramercy Project. The Paris Portfolio. The woman reshaping adaptive reuse. But Sabrina knew her by a different title. The Bride. 4 years collapsed into a single moment. Cathedral. Pointed finger. Red dress. The woman Sabrina had eclipsed, dismissed, erased. Except she wasn't erased. She was here. Radiant. Accompanied by a man Sabrina recognized from Forbes covers. Adrian Blake, tech billionaire, philanthropist, the kind of man who made Chase look like he was playing with daddy's money. And children. Twins. Beautiful, well-dressed, clinging to their mother's hands. Sabrina's grip on Chase's arm slackened. Chase's voice came out strangled. "She's here. I can see that. With him. With Adrian Blake. I can see that too." Chase's scotch trembled. Just slightly. But Sabrina saw it. For 4 years, Amara Lewis had been a ghost story they told themselves. The discarded bride. The woman who'd vanished. The acceptable casualty in their love story. But ghosts don't arrive in custom gowns with billionaire husbands and twin children who look like magazine covers. "Did you know?" Chase demanded, his voice low and urgent. "Know what?" That she was back. That she was. He gestured helplessly at the vision across the room. That. Sabrina didn't answer. She was watching Amara move through the crowd with the kind of ease that couldn't be faked. People gravitated toward her. A board member from the Landmarks Commission. An editor from Architectural Digest. A city council member Sabrina had been trying to network with for 6 months. They all smiled at Amara like she was the sun and they were desperate for warmth. The lights dimmed. A microphone crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced, "please find your seats. We'll be beginning our program shortly." The crowd shifted toward the tables. Amara and Adrian moved to a table near the front, reserved seating, Sabrina noted with growing dread. Chase and Sabrina were 3 tables back. The seating chart was its own hierarchy. Its own verdict. Dinner passed in a blur of courses Sabrina couldn't taste. Chase barely touched his plate. He kept glancing toward the front table, where Amara was laughing at something Adrian said, cutting Kai's chicken into smaller pieces, wiping Lila's mouth with a napkin. Domestic. Normal. Happy. Everything Chase had walked away from. After dessert, the speeches began. The foundation director talked about urban renewal. A politician thanked donors. An actress gave a tearful testimony about affordable housing. Then Adrian Blake stood. The room quieted immediately. Men like Adrian didn't speak often, but when they did, people listened. He was handsome in an understated way, Not Chase's polished, aggressive attractiveness, but something steadier. More real. "I'll keep this brief," Adrian said, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom. "Tonight, I'm honored to announce a partnership that represents everything this foundation stands for: preserving history while building the future." Amara felt her heart rate spike. They'd discussed this, rehearsed it. But sitting here, in this room, with Chase 3 tables away. "The Whitman Gramercy Tower," Adrian continued, "has sat empty for 3 years. A beautiful, historic building waiting for someone to see its potential. We found that someone." He turned, his eyes finding Amara's. The new lead designer on the Whitman Legacy Project, a woman whose vision combines preservation with innovation, whose work has transformed spaces across 2 continents, is Amara Lewis Blake. The room froze. Every eye turned toward Amara. Cameras flashed. A spotlight found her. She stood slowly, Adrian's hand briefly squeezing hers before she rose. The twins looked up at her with wide eyes. Kai waved. The crowd laughed, the sound breaking the tension. Amara smoothed her gown and smiled. Not the broken smile from the cathedral steps, not the mask she'd worn through tabloid storms, but something real and earned and hers. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady. The applause started slowly, then built. People stood. A standing ovation for an announcement that was, on paper, routine. But everyone in that room understood what they were witnessing. The bride who'd been abandoned at the altar. The woman who'd vanished. Now holding the contract to restore the building that bore her ex-fiancé's family name. At his table, Chase Whitman sat frozen, his face drained of color. Sabrina Cortez's hand slipped from his arm entirely. She looked at him, really looked, and saw what she'd been denying for months. He was watching Amara with the expression of a man realizing he'd discarded a Rembrandt to make room for a poster. Sabrina felt something crack inside her chest. Not heartbreak. Something colder. This was the woman he'd compared her to all along. Not the weeping bride. Not the humiliated ex-fiancé. This woman. This architect. This mother. This force. And Sabrina had never stood a chance. The applause continued. Amara sat back down, kissing Lila's head, squeezing Adrian's hand. Across the ballroom, Chase lifted his scotch with a trembling hand and drained it. He looked like a man watching his own future walk away. Because he was. The days after the gala unraveled with the brutal efficiency of a controlled demolition. Monday morning, the Wall Street Journal ran the headline: "Whitman Industries quietly sells off assets amid liquidity crisis." By Tuesday, Bloomberg had the details. Chase Whitman had offloaded 3 commercial properties in Miami, a hotel portfolio in Austin, and minority stakes in 2 tech startups his father had invested in before his death. The sales had happened over the past 18 months. Quiet, desperate, designed to plug holes in a sinking ship. The article quoted an anonymous board member: "The Whitman name still carries weight, but weight doesn't pay debts." By Wednesday, the real story broke. A private equity consortium, Pinnacle Strategic Holdings, now owned 40% of Whitman Industries. The acquisition had been structured through a series of distressed asset purchases, each one appearing unrelated until a financial journalist connected the dots. Pinnacle Strategic Holdings was a subsidiary of Blake Ventures, Adrian Blake's company. The man married to Chase Whitman's ex-fiancée now controlled nearly half of Chase's family empire. The optics were devastating. Social media erupted. Think pieces proliferated. Was this revenge? Strategic business? Both. But the most damning detail came buried in the 3rd paragraph of the Financial Times analysis. Chase had approached Blake Ventures 18 months ago, seeking capital. Adrian had offered terms. Chase, desperate and arrogant, had accepted without reading the fine print. He'd sold his legacy to the man who would marry the woman he'd abandoned. At the Fifth Avenue penthouse, Chase stood in his study surrounded by legal documents, whiskey, and the slow-motion collapse of everything his father had built. His lawyer, the third one in 2 years, sat across from him, exhausted. "We can challenge the acquisition structure," the lawyer offered weakly. "Argue undue influence." "On what grounds?" Chase's voice was hollow. "That I was too stupid to read my own contracts. That Blake had a personal vendetta. He had capital. I needed it." Chase poured another drink. "That's not a vendetta. That's business." The board meeting was scheduled for Friday. An emergency session. Chase knew what was coming: a vote of no confidence, a push for new leadership, a gentle but firm suggestion that he step aside. His father's friends, the men who'd toasted him at christenings and graduations, would remove him with sympathy and ruthless efficiency. The Whitman name would survive. Chase Whitman would not. Sabrina learned about the board meeting the way she learned about everything important these days: by accident. She'd walked past Chase's study Wednesday evening and heard him on the phone, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Friday at 9. Yes, I'll be there. No, I don't need representation. I'm not on trial." He'd hung up and found her in the doorway. "What?" he'd snapped. "Nothing. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. And they both knew it. Thursday morning, Sabrina tried a different approach. She dressed in her sharpest suit, Armani, black, the kind she wore when she needed to be taken seriously, and waited for Chase in the dining room. "I want to come to the meeting tomorrow," she said when he appeared. He didn't even pause. "No, Chase. This isn't a social event, Sabrina. It's a board meeting. I know what it is. I want to help." He finally looked at her, and the expression on his face made her stomach drop. "Help? How exactly would you help?" "By sitting there looking decorative while they dismantle everything my father built. I have a degree in finance. From a state school 10 years ago." His voice was clinical, cutting. "This is private equity, leveraged buyouts, corporate governance. You're out of your depth." The words landed like blows. Sabrina had spent 4 years justifying this relationship, defending her choices, telling herself that stealing Chase from Amara was a victory, proof of her worth, validation of her ambition. But standing in his dining room, dressed in a suit he didn't even notice, she finally understood. She'd never been a partner. She'd been a prop. "This is my fault, isn't it?" she said quietly. "In your head, you're blaming me." Chase turned away, adjusting his cufflinks. "I'm blaming myself for thinking spectacle was the same as strategy." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, reaching for his briefcase, "that leaving Amara at the altar made headlines. Marrying her would have made sense. The silence that followed could have shattered glass." "Get out," Sabrina whispered. "This is my penthouse. Then I'll leave." She walked out of the dining room, down the hallway, into the bedroom they'd shared for 4 years. She pulled a suitcase from the closet and started throwing clothes inside. Not carefully, not methodically, just movement, just escape. Chase appeared in the doorway. "Sabrina." "You pointed at me," she said, not looking at him. "In that cathedral. In front of everyone. You pointed at me like I was the answer to every question you didn't know how to ask." "I know. And I believed you. I thought I'd won something." She laughed bitterly. "But you never had anything worth winning." She zipped the suitcase, grabbed her phone, and pushed past him. "Where are you going?" he called after her. "Anywhere that isn't here." The penthouse door slammed behind her with a finality that echoed through empty marble halls. Meanwhile, across the city in Brooklyn Heights, Amara sat at her dining room table surrounded by blueprints. The Gramercy Project. Structural assessments. Material specifications. Budget proposals. The work that mattered. Kai and Lila were asleep upstairs. Adrian was in his study on a conference call with investors in Tokyo. The house was quiet except for the scratch of Amara's pencil against paper, the hum of the radiator, the distant sound of traffic. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "Have you seen the news? Chase is finished." Amara glanced at the message, then set the phone face down. She didn't need to see the news. Didn't need to read the think pieces or scroll through the schadenfreude on social media. Chase's collapse wasn't her victory. It was simply his consequence. She returned to her blueprints, adjusting the community space layout, ensuring the ground floor would serve the neighborhood, not just the building. Outside, Brooklyn stretched into the night, a million windows holding a million stories. The bride they'd pitted 4 years ago now held the pen rewriting the future. Not through revenge. Not through spectacle. But through competence, consistency, and the quiet power of simply doing the work. The public had seen it at the gala. They were seeing it now in every headline, every architectural review, every photograph of Amara with her children and her designs and her refusal to engage with the drama. She didn't need to fight. She'd already won. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, buried between project updates and vendor invoices. Subject: Request to meet. Amara, I know I have no right to ask this, but I need to speak with you. Not about business. About everything else. Please. Chase. Amara stared at the message for a full minute, her cursor blinking in the reply field. Adrian appeared in the doorway of her home office, carrying Lila, who was covered in what appeared to be yogurt and Triumph. Snack casualty, he explained, then noticed Amara's expression. What's wrong? Chase wants to meet. Adrian's face remained carefully neutral. And, I don't know. She turned the laptop toward him. What do you think? He read the email, then looked at her with those steady eyes that had seen her through breakdowns and breakthroughs. I think you already know what you want to do. You're just checking if you're allowed. Am I? You're asking the wrong person. He kissed the top of her head. But for what it's worth, you don't owe him anything. Not closure. Not forgiveness. Not even a response. Amara looked back at the screen, at the man who'd pointed his finger and redirected her entire life. I know, she said quietly. But I'm curious. About what? Whether I still feel anything. So she replied, Thursday, 2 p.m. The garden at the Frick. Come alone. Thursday arrived cold and clear. The Frick Collection's garden cafe was exactly what Amara needed. Public enough to feel safe, private enough to be honest. Early March meant the garden was still bare. Skeletal trees, dormant flower beds, the promise of spring without its arrival. She arrived 10 minutes early, ordered tea she wouldn't drink, and chose a table in the corner where she could see the entrance. Chase appeared at 2:03. He looked diminished. Not in the obvious ways. His coat was still expensive, his shoes still polished, his haircut still precise. But something fundamental had eroded. His shoulders curved inward slightly. His face had new lines bracketing his mouth. His eyes, once sharp with confidence, now carried the exhausted wariness of someone who'd stopped sleeping well. He spotted her and hesitated, just for a moment, as if confirming he still had permission to approach. Amara didn't stand, didn't smile, just watched him navigate between tables like a man walking through a minefield of his own making. Thank you for coming, he said, sitting down across from her. You have 30 minutes, Amara replied. Not cruel, just factual. My twins have gymnastics at 4. The mention of the twins landed like a stone. Chase flinched, then nodded. A waiter appeared. Chase ordered coffee. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the menu. You look. He stopped, reconsidered. You look well. I am. Silence stretched between them, filled by distant traffic and the rustle of bare branches. Chase finally spoke. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for weeks. Practicing. But everything sounds either insufficient or self-serving. He looked down at his hands. I made a mistake. What I did to you, at the cathedral in front of everyone, you didn't deserve that. Amara said nothing, just watched him with the same careful attention she gave structural assessments. Looking for cracks, weak points, load-bearing truths. I was arrogant, Chase continued. I thought I could rewrite my life like it was a business deal. Cut losses. Maximize gains. I treated you like, his voice cracked, like you were interchangeable. I was, Amara said quietly. To you. No. Chase. Her voice was gentle but firm. Don't revise history now. You pointed at Sabrina because she was exciting. New. Everything I wasn't. And that's fine. People fall out of love. But you didn't have the courage to end it privately. You needed an audience. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. What could he say? She was right. I'm sorry, he finally whispered. I'm so sorry. Amara looked at him, really looked, searching for the fury she'd carried for months after the cathedral. The humiliation. The rage. The fantasies of confrontation she'd nursed during sleepless Parisian nights. But she felt nothing. No, not nothing. Distance. Like looking at a photograph of someone she used to know. I forgive you, she said, and watched surprise flash across his face. You do. Yes. Not because you've earned it, but because carrying anger is exhausting, and I have better things to do with my energy. She leaned forward slightly. But here's what you need to understand, Chase. I didn't lose you that day in the cathedral. Amara. I lost the version of myself that thought I needed you to be complete. The version that measured her worth by whether you chose her. That woman died in the rain outside that church. She paused, choosing her words carefully. And I'm grateful to you for killing her. Because the woman I became is someone I actually like. Chase's coffee arrived. He didn't touch it. I've watched you, he said hoarsely. Your firm. Your work. The gala. You've built something extraordinary. We built something extraordinary, Amara corrected. Adrian and I. As partners. Equals. Something you and I never managed. I know. He looked out at the bare garden, his profile sharp against the gray sky. Sabrina left. Last week. Said I'd turned her into something she wasn't. That I'd used her to prove a point. He laughed bitterly. Turns out I'm excellent at destroying things. Amara felt a flicker of something. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. You're not destroyed, Chase. You're just finally facing consequences. There's a difference. Doesn't feel different. I know. And she did. She remembered that apartment in Brooklyn, the resignation email, the weight of starting over. But you'll survive. Build something new. Just do it honestly this time. Chase finally met her eyes. Can I ask you something? Depends on the question. Do you ever think about what we could have been? If I hadn't, if I'd just... No, Amara said simply. Because that person you would have married, she doesn't exist anymore. And the person you are now. She tilted her head. You're not who I thought you were either. So there's nothing to mourn. He nodded slowly, accepting the truth of it. Amara glanced at her watch. "I need to go." She stood, collecting her coat and bag. Chase remained seated, looking up at her with the expression of someone watching the last train leave the station. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm glad you're happy." Amara paused, considering whether she believed him. Decided it didn't matter. "Goodbye, Chase." Not "see you later." Not "take care." Goodbye. She walked out of the Garden Café, through the Frick's elegant halls, past paintings worth millions that meant nothing compared to the twins waiting at home, the husband who chose her freely, the work she'd built with her own capable hands. Behind her, Chase sat alone at a table in a bare garden, holding a cup of cold coffee and the ghost of what might have been. Amara stepped onto Fifth Avenue, the March wind sharp against her face, and realized something profound. She'd come looking for closure, but she left with something better. Peace. Not the peace of forgiveness granted. The peace of simply no longer caring. Chase Whitman had taken everything from her once, but he'd also, inadvertently, given her the greatest gift. The freedom to become someone who didn't need him at all. She hailed a cab, gave the Brooklyn address, and pulled out her phone to text Adrian. "On my way home. Love you." His reply came instantly. The twins destroyed the living room. "It's magnificent. Hurry back." Amara smiled, genuine, unforced, hers, and watched Manhattan blur past the window. Somewhere in that city, Chase was still sitting in that garden. But Amara was already home. 6 months later, Architectural Digest ran a 12-page spread with a cover that would be framed in design studios across 2 continents. The architect of her own empire. How Amara Blake turned betrayal into brilliance. The photographs were stunning. Amara in her Brooklyn studio, surrounded by blueprints and scale models. Kai and Lila building block towers at her feet. Amara on site at the Gramercy building, hard hat and steel-toed boots, pointing at restored limestone details. Amara and Adrian on their brownstones back steps, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something off camera. But it was the interview that resonated. "I spent years believing my worth was tied to being chosen," Amara had told the journalist. "The cathedral taught me I was wrong. My worth was always mine. I just had to stop outsourcing it to people who couldn't see it." The article traced her journey. The Paris years, the restoration work, the slow build of Louis Blake design, the Gramercy project. But it also acknowledged the elephant no one could ignore. The wedding that never was, the groom who'd pointed elsewhere, the public humiliation that had become public triumph. "Do you feel vindicated?" the journalist had asked. "I feel free," Amara had replied. "Vindication requires caring what they think. I don't anymore." The feature went viral. Design blogs shared it. Business schools used it as a case study. Young architects quoted it in their portfolios. The bride who'd been left at the altar had become the woman who rebuilt not just buildings, but the entire narrative of what survival looked like. The world saw her now not as a victim, but as a mogul, a mother, a woman who'd turned the worst day of her life into the foundation of something extraordinary. Elsewhere, other stories were ending quietly. Sabrina Cortez had moved to Los Angeles 3 months after leaving the penthouse. Her Instagram bio now read, "Lifestyle curator. Wellness advocate. Living authentically." She posted photos of green juices and sunset yoga, partnered with mid-tier beauty brands, and appeared at parties thrown by people famous for being famous. The comments on her posts had shifted from admiration to something more complicated. Whatever happened to that billionaire? Wasn't she with Chase Whitman? Another influencer reinvention. She never mentioned Chase. Never referenced New York. Just curated a new narrative where the past 4 years simply didn't exist. In a profile for a lifestyle blog, she'd said, Sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to find out who you really are. The interviewer hadn't asked the obvious follow-up. And did you like who you found? Chase Whitman sold his remaining shares in Whitman Industries on a Tuesday in August. No press release. No dramatic exit. Just paperwork signed in a lawyer's office, transferring what was left of his family's legacy to a holding company that would rebrand, restructure, and erase the Whitman name within 18 months. He moved to Connecticut, a modest house by his former standards, manageable, quiet. He took a consulting position with a mid-tier investment firm. He stopped attending galas. A Business Insider article titled, "Where Are They Now?" Heirs who lost it all mentioned him in the third paragraph, between a tech founder who'd blown through his inheritance and a hotel heiress who'd been convicted of fraud. Chase Whitman, once heir to a $50 million fortune, now lives in Greenwich and works in corporate advisory. He declined to comment for this piece. The world moved on, as it always did. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Whitman Gramercy Tower happened on a crisp October morning. The building stood transformed, its 1920s facade meticulously restored, its limestone glowing honeygold in the autumn sun. The cast-iron details had been preserved, the original windows replicated, the architectural bones honored. But inside everything was new. 68 apartments, 30% designated affordable housing, ground floor community space with a library, a childcare co-op, and a residence garden, rooftop solar panels, accessibility throughout, history preserved, future built. Amara stood on the sidewalk with Adrian, the twins holding their hands, and looked up at the building she'd saved. A bronze plaque beside the entrance read, Whitman Gramercy Tower restored 2029 Lewis Blake design. Amara Lewis Blake, lead architect. Her name, permanent, cast in metal. The mayor spoke. The Landmarks Commission president praised the restoration. Adrian said a few words about sustainable urban development. Then Amara was handed scissors. A ceremonial ribbon stretched across the entrance. Any words? A reporter called out. Amara looked at the building, then at the crowd. Journalists, investors, future residents, city officials, and smiled. Buildings hold stories, she said simply. This one was broken for a long time. But broken things can be beautiful again if you're willing to do the work. She cut the ribbon. The crowd applauded. And Amara Lewis Blake, who'd once stood in a cathedral wearing a wedding dress and watching her future dissolve, walked into a building she'd resurrected from ruin, her children's laughter echoing in the restored lobby, her husband's hand warm in hers. That evening, they climbed to the rooftop. Not for publicity. Not for photographs. Just the four of them and the city spread below like a promise kept. Adrian poured wine. A 2019 Bordeaux from the year Amara had arrived in Paris alone and terrified. Kai and Lila chased each other around the rooftop garden, their giggles carrying on the October wind. To broken things, Adrian said, raising his glass. To building better, Amara replied, touching her glass to his. They drank, and the wine tasted like victory earned the slow way. One day, one decision, one blueprint at a time. Below them, Manhattan glittered. 1,000,000 windows. 1,000,000 lives. The city that had witnessed her humiliation now held her triumph, though she'd stopped measuring her life by either word. She thought briefly of Chase, sitting in Connecticut with his sold shares and dismantled legacy. Of Sabrina, curating authenticity in Los Angeles. Of the cathedral and the pointed finger and the rain that had tasted like metal and endings. And she felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just the pleasant distance of looking at someone else's story. What are you thinking? Adrian asked. Amara leaned into him, watching Lila try to teach Kai how to cartwheel. That this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. On a rooftop. In my life. He kissed her temple. Our life. Our life, she agreed. Somewhere far below, people were starting their evenings, hailing cabs, meeting lovers, making mistakes they'd spend years recovering from. The city moved in its endless rhythm, indifferent to individual devastation and triumph alike. But up here on this rooftop, on this building Amara had saved, with her children laughing and her husband beside her and her name on the plaque downstairs, the world felt exactly right. She'd been abandoned at an altar 4 years ago, pointed at, dismissed, erased. But she hadn't stayed erased. She'd rebuilt herself in Paris, built a firm in Brooklyn, built a family from love freely given, built a legacy that had nothing to do with the man who'd thrown hers away. And now, standing on the roof of a building that bore his family's name but her vision, Amara understood the final truth. Chase Whitman hadn't destroyed her that day in the cathedral. He'd freed her. The skyline glowed, Manhattan's lights reflecting off glass and steel and possibility. Her city, her family, her empire. And far below, in boardrooms and penthouse apartments and carefully curated Instagram feeds, no one could point fingers anymore, because the bride they'd pitted had become the architect of her own extraordinary life. And that was the legacy that mattered. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.